A $60,000 0 cents luxury SUV just got turned into modern art by one very offended Longhorn. All I wanted was to honor my grandfather by fixing up his old Texas ranch, but HOA Queen Patricia Langford wasn't having it. She slapped me with fake citations, stalked my yard like a cop in heels, and declared, "This property is a disgrace to HOA standards," until the entire neighborhood was too scared to sneeze without a permit. Then she crossed the line she couldn't uncross. She messed with Bo, my grandpa's 2,000-pound horn security system. So what happens when a power-stripping president meets a bull with no patience for nonsense? How does one hoofed legend bring down a luxury vehicle and a suburban tyrant's entire kingdom? Comment where you're watching from, because it all started the morning I picked up a hammer and tried to honor my grandfather's legacy, and ended with a viral video that turned HOA fear into full-blown revolt. Now, I didn't come back to Cedar Hollow for a fight. I came back because after Grandpa passed, the least I could do was finish what he started, restoring the ranch with the same grit and soul he poured into it for 5 decades. The land had bones, stories, and that stubborn Texas charm money can't buy. But to Patricia, it was an eyesore next to her perfectly symmetrical subdivision of pastel prison cells. First came the letter, crisp white envelope, HOA logo stamped like a threat. "Cease all renovation until approved," it said, followed by a page of jargon about grass height, barn structure, and aesthetic congruence. I read it twice, then a third time, just to confirm I hadn't accidentally declared war by replacing a rotted fence post. 2 days later, she arrived in person. I remember the exact moment because my circular saw was still warm and she looked like she'd stepped out of a perfume ad, high heels stabbing into the dirt like they had a vendetta. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice sugar-dipped and razor-edged, "we have standards to maintain here." She glanced around my property like it was a crime scene, her nose wrinkling as if the air itself offended her. Then she gestured broadly at my barn. "That cow shelter is bringing down property values." I told her it was a century-old structure built by my great-grandfather. She told me to have it painted gray and blend in. I asked if personality was banned in this neighborhood or just natural wood. Her smile didn't flinch, but her eyes hardened like concrete. What Patricia didn't realize was that I'd grown up watching Grandpa defend this land with a quiet kind of strength. He wasn't loud, but he was immovable, and he always said, "You don't pick fights, son, but if one picks you, you make sure it regrets the introduction." I wasn't just remodeling an old ranch, I was preserving a legacy. Problem was, Patricia didn't just want conformity, she wanted control, and she had the means to take it. The bylaws, the board, and a group of neighbors too scared to push back. Word around town was, once Patricia targeted you, it was only a matter of time. One family had to repaint their house 4 times in 1 year. Another got fined because their pumpkins were too orange. Not fake stories, real ones, whispered at the grocery store like ghost tales. Her final words that day stuck with me. "You have 72 hours to submit a full renovation proposal for HOA review, or we'll take legal action." Then she added, "Oh, and Jackson, I know people, real people, city council, judges, developers, no one wins against the HOA." She said it like she was the mob boss of suburbia. I watched her pristine SUV roll away, kicking up dust like a retreating tyrant. And as I stood on that worn porch, holding a notice that valued paint samples more than tradition, I realized something. Patricia hadn't just drawn a line. She'd wrapped it in red tape, planted a flag, and dared me to cross it. That's when I glanced at Bo, Grandpa's 2,000-pound Longhorn standing calmly in the pasture. He gave a slow blink, like he'd seen this all before. Maybe he had, because in that moment, I understood. Patricia hadn't declared war on me, she'd declared war on Texas. And we don't do quiet surrender. By the time I finished reading the HOA violation letter for the 5th time, the phrase non-conforming property perimeter had started to feel like a curse carved into my mailbox. I needed answers, or a good lawyer, and since I couldn't afford the latter, I called Dean Monroe, Dean's the kind of guy who keeps a legal pad by the barbecue pit, just in case inspiration or litigation strikes. When he showed up that evening with 2 thermoses, one labeled coffee and the other definitely not, I knew I'd made the right call. "She hit you with Section 4C?" he asked, flipping through the HOA rule book like it was a worn-out Bible. "Yeah, that one's a favorite. Vague enough to fine your lawn gnome, broad enough to bankrupt you." That's when it clicked. Patricia didn't follow rules. She wrote them. In pencil. Dean had seen it before. 6 families forced out in 3 years, all after suddenly receiving fines for everything from overly enthusiastic lighting to unpermitted decorative flair. One guy got slapped with a $1,200.00 penalty for having mismatched patio chairs during a storm. The Langford method, Dean called it, death by paperwork. He leaned back in his lawn chair, sighing like a man who's smelled too many. "The HOA rulebook reads like it was written by a bored dictator with a thesaurus," he muttered. Every page came with 3 possible interpretations, and Patricia picked whichever one helped her crush you under it. I felt the weight of it settle on my chest. This wasn't about taste. It was about targeting. And now I was square in her crosshairs. The more I learned, the more it felt like I was living in a neighborhood run by a tyrant in pearls. Later that night, just as I was locking up the barn, my phone buzzed. No contact, no name, just a single message. "Watch your back, she's got spies." I stared at it for a full minute, the hairs on my neck standing up, like my grandpa used to say, like the land knew a storm was coming. I walked to the window and, sure enough, that white SUV was back. No lights on, just sitting there, engine idling like a vulture that runs on unleaded. She wasn't even subtle anymore. I waved. It didn't move. I didn't either. Whatever game Patricia was playing, she wanted me rattled, but fear only works when it's silent, and I was starting to make noise. The next morning the fine parade continued. Grass too tall by 0.4 inches. Barn exterior not matching community aesthetic. Fence post angle inconsistent with neighboring structures. I half expected the next one to cite me for breathing without a permit. I called Dean again, and he showed up with 2 folding chairs and a fresh stack of printed citations. His own from years past. "I've kept every notice she ever sent me," he said, "all day. I'm going to bind them and sell it as the most boring horror novel ever written." We laughed, but the truth hung in the air. She wasn't just bullying me. She was running a fear campaign. But here's the thing about fear. Once you call it out loud, it starts losing power. And I had a bull out back who didn't spook easy. That evening I stood next to Beau's pen, watching him chew his cud like a philosopher in retirement. "They want you gone too, huh, boy?" I whispered. He blinked, slow and steady, like he already knew this wasn't his first rodeo. I remembered what Grandpa said. "Beau knows the good ones from the bad. You just trust him." So I did. I trusted him to stand still when the storm came. And I trusted myself to start fighting back, not with fists or fines, but with something scarier to people like Patricia. Evidence. I was done being surprised. Now it was time to surprise her. And if she thought a patch of uneven grass was a violation, wait till she saw what happened when the whole neighborhood started to notice who she really was. Because when you corner a man on his own land, you better be ready for the whole pasture to push back. And Patricia? She had no idea what was coming next. I could have rolled over, I could have mowed my lawn with tweezers and painted my barn HOA beige and begged Patricia Langford for forgiveness. But instead I made a sign. Not just any sign, a 6-foot billboard of sarcasm, satire, and suburb-approved sass. Right at the edge of my property line, I installed a bright, professionally printed, perfect HOA yard guide, with arrows pointing to every corner of my supposedly offensive ranch. Each arrow came with a label. Grass height, exactly 3 inches, measured hourly for community safety. Barn exterior, naturally weathered, historically defiant. And my personal favorite, warning, this property contains 1.2% too much personality. I didn't post it for attention. I posted it because humor was the only legal weapon I had left. But what happened next was something Patricia never saw coming. Within hours, folks started slowing down in front of my fence. At first it was just a few cars, then a few more. Then someone parked just to take pictures. A teenager on a bicycle snapped a selfie in front of the sign and tagged it with Bono's HOAs. That one hashtag exploded like a brush fire in dry season. Before sunset, my mockery had become Cedar Hollow's most visited attraction. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in months were suddenly waving from their driveways. One guy actually laughed so hard he dropped his iced coffee out the car window. I hadn't meant to start a movement, but sometimes all it takes is one properly labeled wood pile to make people remember what common sense looks like. That afternoon, Maggie Torres showed up at my gate. She looked both amused and nervous, like someone coming to confess a secret and ask for more. "That sign," she said between chuckles, "is the best thing to happen to this neighborhood since the HOA banned wind chimes." We talked for 20 minutes. Maggie told me about the time she was fined $800, 0 cents, yes, $800, because her roses were too red, not diseased, not overgrown, just red. Patricia had informed her that community standards called for muted corals and pastels to avoid overstimulation of the shared visual experience. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I settled for both. Maggie looked around before she leaned in and whispered, "There are more of us, Jackson. People who've been fined, threatened, humiliated. We've just been too afraid to speak up. Until now, that's when it hit me. The sign wasn't just satire. It was permission." By evening, folks were sending me messages, screenshots, their own violations. Someone had been cited for using a non-regulation garden gnome, another for having a hammock that was visible from the street and suggested laziness. It was like living in a comedy sketch written by a control freak. But behind the jokes was real pain, real fear. Neighbors had spent years feeling like prisoners in their own homes, forced to tiptoe through yards like they were crossing a minefield. And here I was, holding up a mirror with a 6-foot sign that said, "This is ridiculous and we all know it." The best part? Not a single part of my sign violated any official rule. Patricia couldn't find me because I was following her script, just loud. That night I sat on the porch with Bo, watching the headlights roll by as people came to see the HOA yard diagram. He snorted like he was in on the joke, and maybe he was. Grandpa always said Bo had more sense than half the town council. The air felt lighter. Not free, but lighter. I hadn't beaten Patricia. Not yet. But I'd dented her armor, and more importantly, I'd cracked the silence. Because once people start laughing, they stop being afraid, and when fear starts to die, the bully's power goes with it. I didn't know what Patricia's next move would be, but something told me she wouldn't take this quietly. No dictator ever does. And I wasn't done pushing, not by a long shot. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a security alert. At first, I figured it was a raccoon or maybe Bo doing his midnight perimeter check, but when I opened the footage from the barn cam, I nearly dropped my coffee. There she was, Patricia Langford, in full black outfit like a discount spy thriller villain, tiptoeing through my pasture like she was avoiding landmines. She crept right up to Bo's gate and fiddled with the latch like she had every right in the world to be there. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't smart, and it wasn't legal. But it was Patricia, moving through legal gray areas like a raccoon through garbage, messy, bold, and 100% shameless. She must have assumed no one would be watching. After all, she'd spent years convincing this neighborhood to sleep with both eyes shut. But cameras don't blink. And neither does paranoia once it's been activated. The footage was grainy, but the silhouette was unmistakable. And the angle caught just enough to see the designer scarf she wore during her last confrontation. That's what finally convinced me she wasn't just bluffing, she was escalating. And if she was willing to sneak onto private property under cover of darkness, then the game had moved past citations. This was something darker, something organized. The HOA wasn't a board, it was a cartel in cardigans. I called Maggie the next morning and showed her the footage. Her face went pale like someone recognizing a ghost. Then she reached into her purse and handed me a folded sheet of paper. It was a list. Names, addresses, dates. Every person on here was fined, pressured, or mysteriously forced to sell over the past 4 years, she said. 3 of them left town. 2 had properties that ended up in the hands of a development group Patricia's brother works with. It's all connected. I stared at the list and felt the anger rise behind my eyes. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic. What looked like a petty power trip was actually a long con. And suddenly, my ranch wasn't just the target. It was the next big prize. Later that afternoon, I walked the property with Bo, checking the fence line. That's when I saw it, half buried in the mud near his gate. A glove. Black leather, expensive looking, and monogrammed with the initials PL, like she was signing her crimes now. I picked it up like it was a snake, holding it between 2 fingers and laughing through the disbelief. Patricia had gone from HOA president to full-blown nighttime trespasser, leaving behind calling cards like a villain with a fan club. She didn't just want me out. She wanted control of the land before anyone figured out why she wanted it so badly. But she underestimated something. A man raised by Texas dirt doesn't back down when he smells a setup. He starts digging. I took the glove inside, cleaned it off, and locked it in a box with the video footage. Evidence. If Patricia thought she was the only one building a case, she'd better think again. Every HOA horror story in this neighborhood just turned into witness testimony. Every past citation suddenly looked like motive, and every friendly inspection now sounded more like a threat. I still didn't know exactly what her endgame was, but I knew where it started. Bo's gate. And the mistake Patricia made, the one she can't take back, was thinking no one would notice a bull watching her from the shadows. The next move was mine, and it was going to make her regret underestimating the family that trained him. You ever wake up to a silence so wrong it practically screams? That's what got me out of bed that morning. No birds, no wind, just a stillness so unnatural it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I threw on my boots and stepped out onto the porch. And that's when I saw the gates wide open. Bo's pen open. My jaw clenched before my brain even caught up. I sprinted toward the pasture like I was late for Judgment Day, and there he was, Bo, calm as a monk, standing in the middle of the driveway, watching Patricia Langford stroll toward her Tesla, like she hadn't just committed felony livestock tampering at the crack of dawn. Turns out, Patricia had come back, snuck onto my property again, and tried to set Bo loose in the middle of the neighborhood. Her brilliant plan? Let him cause some chaos, then blame me for endangering the community. Only problem was, Bo wasn't your average bull. He didn't do chaos, he did calculation. He did rampage when she opened the gate. He waited, watched, like he was letting her write the last sentence of her own resignation letter. When she turned her back, Bo started walking. Not running. Walking. One slow, deliberate step at a time. Like a 4-legged attorney headed to court with receipts. And then, poetic justice struck. Patricia reached her Tesla, unlocked it, and climbed in, probably planning to make a quick escape before anyone noticed. Bo trotted right up behind her and, in one glorious act of divine bovine vengeance, reared his massive head and sat on the hood like it was a plastic lawn chair. The sound of metal crunching was downright spiritual. Her shriek from inside could have shattered her The front end of her $50,000 0-cents pride and joy crumpled like a soda can at a barbecue. And Bo? He just blinked and shifted his weight, denting it deeper with a kind of deliberate grace that only comes from true Texas lineage. That would have been satisfying enough, but it got better. Turns out, a group of teenagers had been riding bikes down the street and caught the whole thing on camera. One of them narrated like he was hosting a nature show, and here we see the suburban predator fleeing from her natural consequences. His buddy chimed in. It's like National Geographic, but petty. By the time I reached Bo, the live stream already had comments flooding in. This is justice! That bull deserves a medal. Bull knows HOAs. Patricia, meanwhile, was trapped in the driver's seat, pounding the horn with one hand and yelling, "Not up to HOA standards!" like it was a spell that might turn back time. The police showed up 20 minutes later, lights spinning, expressions somewhere between confusion and amusement. I calmly showed them the security footage of Patricia sneaking in, opening Beau's gate, and trying to provoke him with noise and motion. They watched as she threw rocks toward the barn, clapped her hands, even smacked the fence to rile him up. Beau, to his credit, didn't budge. Until she gave up and walked away, that's when he made his move. Deliberate, decisive, personal. The officer chuckled, shook his head, and said, "Looks like the bull had more judgment than the board." But me? I didn't laugh. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Patricia had just lost her car. She hadn't yet realized she was about to lose everything else. And Beau? He just wandered back to his pen like a legend returning to his throne. If this story made you laugh, think, or nod your head in frustration, then don't keep it to yourself. Send it to a friend who's dealing with their own HOA headache or power-hungry neighbor. You never know who needs that reminder that they're not alone, or that sometimes the best defense is 2,000 pounds of Texas attitude. Drop a comment and let me know what you thought of the story and if you've ever faced a petty tyrant in your own backyard. Let's hear it. I've always believed if you're going to set a trap, make it look like surrender. So that morning I played my part like a washed-up rancher with no fight left. I called Patricia's office with a voice full of fake defeat. "I just can't keep up with the repairs and fines. Maybe we could talk about a deal." I practically heard her grin through the phone. "Of course, Jackson," she cooed. "I'll swing by around 3 for a final inspection. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement." Translation, she thought I was done, broken, ripe for harvesting. But this wasn't surrender, it was setup. And this time, the HOA wasn't the only one writing down what happened. Dean arrived 20 minutes later with more hidden cameras than a true crime documentary. Maggie called to say 20 neighbors were lined up to attend a surprise HOA emergency meeting that evening, and the rest? They were about to become my live audience. We wired the porch, the kitchen, even Beau's pen just in case she made another move on my bull. Then we scattered half-packed boxes and draped furniture in sheets to sell the illusion. Defeated homeowner. Ready to run. The stage was set. Now we just needed the villain to deliver her monologue. At 2:59, Patricia's white SUV glided into my driveway like a parade float at a guilt-free festival. She stepped out in her signature power suit, clipboard in hand, smile sharper than broken glass. She strolled through the house like a realtor previewing her next acquisition. "Such a shame," she said, capping my countertop. "But sometimes people need to know when they've lost." I nodded meekly, kept my hands in my lap, and let her talk. And oh boy, did she talk. About the developer waiting in the wings, about the new luxury units, about her cut of the profits. "I'll be getting 20% off the top," she whispered, like she was proud of it. "This land's worth millions, Jackson, and you're too sentimental to see it." Every word broadcasted live to 43 neighbors watching from their phones, lawn chairs, and a few with popcorn. Then came the contract, pre-written, lowball, and oozing desperation. "Sign here and the HOA fines disappear. We drop the lawsuit. Everyone walks away happy." That's when I tilted my head, stared straight at her, and said, "Before I sign anything, I need to know, was this always the plan? Force me out to cash in?" She leaned back, smirked, and dropped the mask. "Of course it was. You think I care about grass height or mailbox color? This is about power, sweetheart. HOA power, and people like you, you're just a bump on the development timeline." I pulled out my phone and hit play. Her own voice echoed through the room. Her face went white as primer paint. "You recorded me?" she shrieked, lunging across the table. I stepped back, phone still rolling. "Texas is a one-party consent state, Patty," I said, "and I just happened to be that one." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out, just the faint buzz of incoming notifications as the group chat exploded with reactions from our live stream. I added one more nail to her coffin. Oh, and those 5 HOA board members watching? They're real interested in your finder's fee. Pretty sure that money was supposed to go to the HOA, not your beach condo fund. Her phone started ringing. The HOA board. The neighbors. Reality. She bolted for the door, and just as she did, Maggie stepped in holding something. Another black leather glove. You dropped this again, Patricia. This one was by Beau's gate. Care to explain why you were there again? The woman froze, face twitching like a glitch in a video game. The curtain had fallen, but the show wasn't over. Not yet. Because when the whole community hears the wolf's confession, they don't just chase her off the porch. They burn the den to the ground. And Patricia? She had no idea what kind of fire she'd just lit. By the time Patricia's second glove made its way into Maggie's hands, the crowd outside my property had tripled. Word spreads fast when a community's been holding its breath for years. People came in robes, ball caps, even church shoes, because when injustice starts crumbling, nobody wants to miss the sound. I uploaded the footage of her confession before she even made it out of my front yard, and then I uploaded the other footage. The 3 a.m. break-in, the gate tampering, the footage of Beau eyeing her like she was chewing on borrowed time. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd stomped on it with both heels, left tire marks, and posed for a portrait next to the wreckage. But the police arrived in time to catch the back half of the chaos. Patricia's Tesla still half crumpled like a bad memory, Beau chewing hay nearby with zero remorse. "This your animal?" the officer asked me. "Yes, sir, that's Beau," I said proudly. "Family raised, level-headed, smarter than most HOA bylaws." He looked at the footage, looked at the broken gate, and just nodded like this was the most Texan thing he'd seen all week. Beau didn't have to charge, he just existed, and still managed to flatten a Tesla and a reputation in one morning. At that moment, Beau was less a bull and more a gavel, and he'd just brought court to order. But the real moment, the turning point, the thunderclap came when Maggie stepped onto my porch with a flash drive in one hand and her phone in the other. "Play it," she said to the officer. The audio was rough but clear. Patricia bragging to someone about accelerating the departure of certain residents, suggesting an unfortunate incident involving livestock, and laughing about how some structures don't hold up well under pressure. The crowd fell silent. Then it turned loud. Real loud. Because nothing cuts through HOA fog, like hearing the dictator plot sabotage in her own voice. One neighbor shouted, "She threatened by Grandma's mailbox!" Another held up a stack of fines. And right then, the fear that had held this place hostage evaporated like rain on a skillet. The HOA board showed up minutes later, looking like they'd just realized they'd been in the wrong history book. One of them, old Mr. Finley, turned to the crowd and said, "There will be an immediate vote on the removal of Patricia Langford from her position as HOA president." He didn't even finish the sentence before the applause drowned him out. Phones were raised, cameras flashed, and someone, I swear on Beau's horns, started chanting, "Beau for president." Within seconds, the whole crowd had joined. "Beau for president! Beau for president!" I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch. Patricia, meanwhile, tried to sneak toward her car, what was left of it anyway, but 2 officers stopped her, with a polite but firm, "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us." As she was being led away, still muttering something about not up to HOA standards, the irony practically lit up the sky. Turns out the biggest safety hazard in the neighborhood wasn't a 2,000-pound bull, it was a power-hungry woman with a clipboard and a grudge. The local news caught wind fast. How could they not, with half the town live-streaming it? And just like that, the narrative shifted. This wasn't a zoning dispute anymore, it was a reckoning. And the bull? He wasn't the villain. He was the verdict. But there was still one chapter left to write, because while Patricia's HOA crown was officially yanked, her development scheme, well, that still had a paper trail. And I had a feeling Grandpa left me more than just a barn and a bull. I had a feeling he left me proof. And it was time to find it. 3 days after Patricia Langford was escorted off my porch and into the back of a police cruiser, things started feeling lighter around here. Like the whole neighborhood had been exhaling for years and finally remembered how to breathe. The fines were voided, the lawsuit vanished, and the HOA board, now chaired by Walter Riggins, issued an official apology that included the words, "excessive overreach and unjustified intimidation," which in HOA language might as well be a public stoning. But despite the victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandpa had seen all this coming. The way he trained Bo to guard the barn, the way he documented everything, the way he always said, "lock the gate, but don't forget to listen." I didn't know what he meant, until the wind knocked over an old tool crate in the barn, and behind it, I noticed a panel in the wall I'd somehow missed for years. Prying it open took some doing, but inside was a metal box, sealed tight with duct tape and rust. Inside the box, a folded letter, dated just a month before he passed, a set of documents, and a small cloth bag of coins. Real silver dollars. The letter started simply, "Jackson, if you're reading this, someone's tried to take what doesn't belong to them." That alone stopped me cold. Then he continued, explaining how developers had sniffed around this land for decades, always waving big checks and bigger lies. But Grandpa never sold, not because of stubbornness, but because of something deeper. This ranch doesn't just sit on land, it sits on oil and gas, and enough mineral rights to make the wrong kind of people real interested in watching it burn. And just like that, Patricia's obsession made perfect sense. This was never about barn paint or mailbox alignment. It was about millions, hidden beneath a barn, wrapped in legacy. The documents confirmed it. Mineral rights dating back to 1938, untouched and privately held, buried under layers of bureaucratic camouflage. Grandpa had kept them hidden, protected, waiting for the right moment. Or maybe the right fight. "You were always going to face something bigger than you," he wrote. "Just remember, son, sometimes the old ways aren't stubborn. They're sacred." And then, right at the bottom, a line that hit harder than any fist. "If Bo causes damage, it's because he recognized a threat. Trust the bull. He knows what matters." I sat on that barn floor for a long time, staring at the ink like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. The old man hadn't just left me land. He'd left me a blueprint for how to defend it. With patience, with wit, and with a bull smarter than most bureaucrats. The story spread far and wide. Local news, national outlets, even a podcast or two. "Texas man outsmarts HOA tyrant with bull, barn, and brains" became the headline of the month. And Bo? He went from neighborhood legend to internet celebrity. Folks were showing up with snacks, signs, even a kid-sized sheriff's badge someone 3D printed. One woman drove in from 2 towns over just to take a selfie with the bull that broke the board. I couldn't go to the feed store without someone asking, "Hey, that Bo fella still keeping folks honest?" I'd just smile and nod. The truth was, the real security system wasn't the cameras. It was Bo, big, quiet, and judgmental in all the right ways. And then came the letter from Montana. Postmarked from a town I'd never heard of, it was handwritten in blue ink and opened with, "Dear Jackson, heard about your HOA saga. We got a buffalo named Duke out here who's about ready to flatten a riding mower if our president files one more complaint about fence color. Any advice?" I laughed so hard I almost dropped my coffee. So I wrote back, told them what Grandpa told me, told them about the power of community, the danger of silence, and the beauty of a bull who knows the difference between a fence and a line in the sand. I even sent a photo of Bo standing tall in front of Patricia's mangled Tesla with the caption, "Sometimes the best protest walks on 4 legs and doesn't say a word." We rebuilt not just the ranch, but the neighborhood. People talked more, helped more. Kids rode bikes past my fence again without their parents glaring at me like I was a liability. Maggie baked a cake shaped like a Tesla and brought it to the HOA's first reform meeting. They voted to limit enforcement power, require public hearings for any fines, and establish something unheard of, grace periods. And Bo? He's still in the pasture, still chewing like a philosopher, still watching every visitor like they might be hiding a clipboard. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever dealt with overreach, pettiness, or petty power plays dressed up as policy, then don't just keep it to yourself. Send it to a friend who's living through their own version of this madness. Remind them that sometimes the loudest voice isn't a shout, it's a snort and a stomp. Drop a comment and let me know what you thought of this story. And remember, they might measure our grass, but they'll never measure our grit. Because some boundaries aren't built with fences, they're built with history, dignity, and one very well-trained Texas bull. Standing there beside Bo, watching the sun dip behind the same hills my grandfather once rode across, I finally understood what this whole fight had really been about. It wasn't just about a barn or bylaws or even Bo's now famous Tesla takedown. It was about holding the line when no one else will. About standing your ground when someone in a blazer and badge says you don't belong. And most of all, it was about honoring the people who came before us, not with silence, but with action. My grandfather didn't just leave me a ranch, he left me a legacy. And if a 2,000-pound bull had to remind a neighborhood of what respect looks like, then I'd say we were right on time. This story isn't just about one corrupt HOA or a stubborn rancher. It's about every person who's ever been told to shrink, to comply, to give up what matters for the sake of fitting in. It's about how humor can disarm fear, how truth always finds a way to surface, and how standing alone doesn't always mean you're standing wrong. Whether you're facing paperwork, politics, or petty power grabs, remember, you don't need $1 million to fight back. Sometimes all you need is community, courage, and maybe one highly opinionated bull. If this story hit home, if you laughed, if you learned something, or if you just needed to hear that standing your ground still matters, share it. Send it to a friend who's battling their own HOA or workplace dictator. Leave a comment and tell us what part of the story stuck with you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next story where the underdog rises and the clipboard comes crashing down. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remind people what they're made of. See you in the next episode. Now, I've got a question for you. Yeah, you sitting there shaking your head or laughing at Bo's Tesla demolition. What would you like to hear next? Another wild HOA story? A workplace showdown? Or maybe a small-town scandal with a poetic twist? Drop your ideas in the comments. Your story idea might just be the next episode, because around here, we don't just tell stories, we tell yours. So go ahead, hit that like, subscribe if you haven't, and comment below what you'd love to see next. We're building something together, and I want your voice in it.